Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm really pleased to see so many people gathered in what is a fabulous hotel. Thank you, Rianne, for asking me to do this. We thought it would be quite useful just to give a context within which ArtWorks Cymru exists, to give you some sort of sense of the national ArtWorks programme, which ArtWorks Cymru is a part of. As Rianne has said, I've been working on both the development and then the project direction of ArtWorks for at least 5 years, actually, and it's probably worth just explaining where it came from. Paul Hamlyn Foundation, for those of you that don't know, is a private trust with 3 funding strands as part of its grant-giving work. The first is the arts, the second is social justice, and the third is education. They also do a little bit of work in India, developmental work in India. Now, over a number of years, the head of arts had become aware of the fact that artists were working across all of their funding programs. So the social justice program were funding grants, supporting projects, which were engaging artists to work in participatory settings, and of course that was also happening in education. And they began to wonder whether there was a need for an intervention, a strategic intervention, that could be made by the foundation to assist in the development of artists' skills, knowledge, reflection, their CPD, Workforce Development Initiative. And so some research was carried out over a 2-year period across the UK, and the result of that was the funding of ArtWorks as a special initiative in March of 2010. We then invited proposals from across the UK for what we called Pathfinders, projects that would be infrastructure-based, would be collaborative, would involve a range of different partners, and which would look at not reinventing the wheel, but building on existing good practice and trying to find new ways of supporting artists through that, so taking work forward rather than recreating new stuff. So that's where it came from. And in 2011, 5 Pathfinders were supported by the foundation, and a central budget was held back to allow for centralised project direction and some further development and commissioning that might take place alongside the 5 Pathfinders over the 3-year period, and maybe plug gaps or supplement knowledge. So that's the sort of big picture. The programme itself is actually, it began as a 3-year programme. In effect, it's ended up being 3.5 years, because each of the Pathfinders decided very early on in the process that they needed longer than the 3 years. And I think that was largely because each project, although very different, all involved different kinds of partnerships. And of course, partnership doesn't gel together overnight. It takes time to build. So the reality of the process was that every Pathfinder, within about 18 months, asked for a 6-month extension on their timeline. So all projects are now ending in the autumn of 2014, so 6 months to go. And the overall initiative will end in March of 2015. So the Pathfinder projects across the UK were, as I said, about seeding models of working and achieving enhanced quality for participants through focusing on the development of artists and providing opportunities for artists to further their practice. I won't read through these because for many of you these will be very familiar. But the overall aim of the programme was very clearly about workforce development, and through workforce development enhancing quality for the end user, if you like, the participant. There were 3 key objectives about developing and piloting and then embedding CPD and training opportunities, developing a better understanding of quality, secondly, and then thirdly, developing evidence and disseminating that evidence. And we are now really in the final stage of the project, and so are beginning to start that dissemination process in earnest. There is a Ning site. I don't know whether people here are already signed up to that, but there is a website. If you Google ArtWorks, it'll come up, ArtWorks PHF. And all of the research that's been carried out, all of the projects and publications are all present on that website. So please do use that resource. It's actually a very extensive resource now and will become more and more extensive and valuable as we progress through this final year. We had aspired for outcomes. I kind of like this phrase because it implies it's not fixed. You know, there's a kind of aspiration, there's a hope, there's an ambition that we'll achieve these things. And I think we are already beginning to see quite a bit of progress in most of these areas actually. We started off by feeling that if we could give artists more confidence, if we could develop the way in which this work was articulated, so that people were articulating it more confidently, then we might increase the value of it. We might increase and move away from that position where artists feel that their work in participatory settings is viewed as less important than other artwork. We wanted to affect the participants' experience, obviously. We wanted to create a better understanding of quality. We wanted to generate models of good practice and share them. We wanted a more effective infrastructure, and we wanted more partnership working. And I think we're moving very much in those directions. I mean, just to give you an example of the partnership working, I was in conversation yesterday with the Carnegie UK Trust, who are now interested in working with Paul Hamlyn Foundation on something that will move forward the legacy of ArtWorks. And that's really exciting to think that we're beginning to influence other funders with this work. And I think the increased involvement of Arts Council Wales in ArtWorks Cymru has been similarly significant over the last 3 years and is a great kind of foundation for moving this work forward in Wales. As I said, we funded 5 Pathfinders. They were ArtWorks North East, ArtWorks London, ArtWorks Cymru, I apologise for still having Wales on here, ArtWorks Scotland, and ArtWorks Navigator. They're all very, very different. I'm not going to give you too much detail on each of them because, again, on the website there are profiles of each of these Pathfinders. Each project has been led in a different way, by which I mean ArtWorks Scotland was actually led by a funder, by Creative Scotland. So already was embedded, if you like, within the funding system. Whereas ArtWorks Cymru has been led by Welsh National Opera. ArtWorks London was led by Barbican and Guildhall, which was an interesting combination of a presenting and producing arts organisation with a conservatoire. And so the implications of that from the beginning were very clear. You know, how could one influence the other, and how might the needs of the employer, if you like, the producing, presenting organisation, affect the delivery of the conservatoire into the longer term. ArtWorks Navigator is very different from the other 4 in that it's a partnership of the membership organisations that represent artists across art forms across the UK. And it was a very important element of the mix because of that reach to upwards of 25,000 artists. We felt that it had real sort of value within the mix in terms of the development of codes of practice, the development of the quality frameworks, but also the dissemination of information and knowledge to artists. ArtWorks North East was led by what could be called a new university, the University of Sunderland. And so in contrast to Barbican Guildhall, where we had a conservatoire, here we had a university leading the project, which was already very committed to embedding participatory work into its arts programmes. So they were all very, very different, all had different emphases, but all shared, if you like, a common core. They were all committed to action research and all committed to sharing the knowledge that came out of each Pathfinder across the network of 5. So on a regular basis, a quarterly basis, the Pathfinders have met right throughout the 3-year period. Knowledge has been exchanged, models have been transferred, different things have been trialled across different Pathfinders, and the learning's all been pooled, thus trying to add value to the individual projects. So then fundamentally, I think ArtWorks is a collaborative model. You know, we started on the premise that if we really wanted to achieve change, if we really wanted to effect some change in this practice, up the ante, get more profile for it and better provision, then we would do that best if we worked collaboratively. And I think that also is important within the current economic climate. When we launched the call for proposals for ArtWorks, in England we were facing the first MPO round with Arts Council England. The structural change here in Wales was ongoing at that point. So we knew that there were major shifts occurring within the external climate. And we felt that new business models, new ways of working cross-organisationally would be key to any form of success within this initiative. We were looking, it's a bit corny, the phrase, we were looking, I suppose, for a paradigm shift. This work has a very long history in the UK, and we have a very high international profile for the quality of what we do in participatory settings here in the UK. We're looked at internationally as being a leader in that field, and yet we haven't yet got everything right. So, it was about trying to shift some of that and actually build our confidence as a sector within the overall arts sector. And moving away, I think, from individual units, moving away from the closed thinking that you might get within one organisation, and actually adding value by working with other organisations in a more porous way seemed to be worth experimenting with. So there was a bit of a kind of notion of an ecology that sat underneath the design of ArtWorks, and it's very interesting, 3 years in, talking to the partners and talking to projects about how that's actually worked in practice. And there's a lot of learning that we can now share with the rest of the sector on the things that we know work with partnership working and the things that we know might provide barriers or create hurdles that you have to climb over, the sort of identifying where problem areas might be. Higher education, further education were clearly very important in this mix because most of the initial training of artists takes place within a further education, a higher education context. And research that existed pre-ArtWorks and research that we've carried out within the programme highlighted a mismatch between that initial training and what the market was actually asking for, the supply and the demand side. Just to give you a very particular example, in the dance field, nationally, UK-wide, we're talking about maybe 4,500 dancers who are coming out of higher education institutions on an annual basis. And yet the work in that field actually probably entails around about 140 full-time contracts. So, the whole of the dance field has to die off annually for the work to actually be there for the people that are coming out of further and higher education institutions looking for a career in that field. So numerically there's a gap, but it is also about what the training is actually preparing people for. And a lot of the feedback that we had, a lot of the existing research from artists during the consultation period was that young artists were not feeling prepared for what the market actually was providing for them in terms of a career or work opportunities. So we felt that it was really important to look at initial training, to work with FE in higher education because this was an action research project and therefore research expertise and the knowledge that existed within that sector could be quite important to us. We felt that postgraduate and CPD could be developed further in partnership with FE and HE. We wanted to work collaboratively to develop that system, looking at the supply and the demand, looking at employer-developed solutions and how employers might work with FE and HE, and again looking at the quality side of things. So in each of the Pathfinders, less, I would say, here in ArtWorks Cymru than in the other four, there was an emphasis on working with FE and HE. And I'm flagging this because part of the purpose of the next 2 days is for you all to think about how you move this work forward. And it seems to me that this may be one of the directions that ArtWorks Cymru might want to consider as a priority moving forward, but that is entirely up to you. A lot of the stuff that's emerged from the other Pathfinders has shown very clearly how valuable the collaboration between the employing sector, the artists, and the higher education sector can be in pushing things forward. We had an event on Tuesday of this week, on April Fool's Day, interestingly, where we shared a lot of the findings in relation to higher education across the Pathfinders. As I said right at the beginning, in addition to funding the five Pathfinders, we've worked beyond the Pathfinders with the Development and Commissioning Fund that we had held centrally. And this has allowed us to plug gaps in the practice. It's allowed us to run a series of events and platforms to add value, to reach a wider community of practice. It's also helped, I think, to join up the thinking. So we've commissioned quite a bit of research as part of that programme. Again, Rhiannon referred to the working paper that Mary Schwartz produced. That's an example of the kind of thing that we've commissioned centrally. And what we're moving into now in this final phase is a period of advocacy and influencing. We're working with a company who are specialists in advocacy campaigns and looking at the knowledge that we have and who we need to influence and who we need to give key messages to in order to move this practice forward. So how are we doing? I think we're doing pretty well. We've gone through initial consultation, research, reflection. A lot of the learning that's come out nationally is now, it has been tested in piloting phases, and it's being embedded within the organisations that have been involved in the partnerships. We're looking at how we scale it up, how we roll it out, how we widen the reach, hence the event on April the 1st, which was saying, we've learned this, we know it works, maybe you'd like to try it. We're looking at how we engage with a wider community of practice, advocating for change, and we're also looking at the wider national and international picture. This is a diagram that just seeks to help you to visualise really the kind of the clusters of work. It's I suppose a kind of conceptual framework that's emerged throughout the process. But none of this is specific to any one Pathfinder. It's just trying to cluster what the outputs might be, if you like, or have been. So if you start at the top in the lilac box, there's been a lot of work around understanding quality. Quality guidelines, frameworks, standards, codes of practice, some research into how participants perceive quality that was led by ArtWorks Cymru, and that's been hugely valuable in feeding into the overall picture. On the basis of that, you can then look at the training and development models that partners have developed, whether that be curriculum, whether it be course developments, whether it be placement guidance, whether it be fellowships or qualifications, a whole range of different training and development models that have come out from that cluster of work. And they have all been premised on the work that we've done exploring different learning methods and approaches. A lot of work was done in the first 18 months to try to identify how artists liked to learn. You know, rather than saying, okay, let's do an MA, is that actually what an artist wants when they're in the middle stage of their career or later stages of their career? Or do they want something more flexible and more situated? And yes, the answer was yes, I want something more flexible and more situated. You know, generally the feedback through all of the work that we've done, masses of consultation and piloting, is that people want flexible provision and they want it to be situated in the practice. They want opportunities for reflection. They want to learn from one another. And, you know, so this kind of stuff is not actually that expensive when you think about it. In the current climate, we can't be thinking about really expensive solutions. We have to think about cost-effective solutions. And I think in terms of what we've learned, what artists actually appreciate are the things that can be put together in a much more cost-effective and flexible way. The peer-to-peer learning model, the learning model developed here through ArtWorks Cymru, was hugely valuable for the partners within the Pathfinder, and is published on the Ning site. And then coming around to the green box, a lot of work has happened in terms of career and progression routes, looking at how people access careers in this area. How are we communicating working in a participatory setting to someone who maybe has come through doing a lot of participatory work as a young person, young person, and then is going into maybe a higher education course? do they think about participatory work as being a potential career for them? And if not, why not? And what can we do about that? And also, how does that then progress through a lifelong learning pathway, if you like? So some work was done on careers guidance led by ArtWorks North East, and that is about to be shared and disseminated more widely. So that kind of helps, I think, to conceptualise the sort of range of things that have been done. And sitting in the blue box in the middle is the infrastructure that's enabled that to happen. And I think one of the predominant things that we've learned is that you do need that collaborative infrastructure to make stuff happen and move forward, because no one organisation or one individual can do any of this stuff alone. And across ArtWorks as a whole, more than 100 partners have been involved in actually moving this forward, and that's pretty significant, you know, across Scotland, Wales, England, and just from last November with some partners in Northern Ireland. So very quickly, some of the things that I think are sort of emerging and that we will be disseminating as we move forward are listed here. I'm not going to read through the list, but you know, quality frameworks, models for learning, preferred learning methods. We've learned a lot about the importance of employers, commissioners in the mix, you know, ranging from how important the skills of the project manager who is designing a participatory project is, to how important the communication and the relationship between the project manager and the artist who subsequently delivers might be. So, you know, a lot of material there and a lot of things that we're planning to build on. But probably most importantly, what we've learned is the importance of dialogue and conversation. That all of the stuff, I think, that has proved most valuable, whether it be through artist consultation or through conversations with higher education, has come about through real dialogue and kind of really surfacing issues and looking at joint problem solving. And the final point on there, it comes up time and time again through the consultations and the work that we've done, is the need for a voice, you know, for one voice. If we really want to join up thinking, we have to be singing off the same hymn sheet, we have to be, you know, maybe using similar language and articulating the work and not kind of arguing about what we call it, but sharing our values. We're looking very much centrally at these two key questions at the minute. This is why I don't sleep at night, except last night, because I had 5 wonderfully soft pillows on my bed in this hotel. But these are the things that keep me awake at night. The Paul Hamlyn Foundation Special Initiative ends in March of 2015. So where do the resources come from to support the scaling up and the rollout? How do we all work together to make sure that happens? And what can I do over the next 12 months to support the individual Pathfinders to make sure that their programs are sustainable into the longer term? And then secondly, just whose responsibility is it to take forward the learning, the models, the partnerships that have emerged from the work? It can't be, again, it can't be any one organisation's responsibility. It has to be a shared one if we're to achieve a legacy. And when I talk about legacy, I'm talking both UK-wide and I'm talking about Cymru. The legacy will come, I believe, and these have all got question marks after them, but I believe that any legacy, any long-term developments will come through collaboration, will come through networks, will come through sharing the new models and ways of working and continuing to develop them and continuing to share them. It's not as if we've reached a point where everything's done. It's about how we continue to do that into the future, to enhance provision. And I think that the knowledge exchange and the partnerships with higher education, which, you know, if we think about it, are so well resourced in relation to the arts. You know, we're talking about big infrastructure, we're talking about massive resource in terms of facilities, staff and expertise. How can we harness that to really move forward with the practice on the ground? And how do we embed the practice and the learning and finally build our profile and confidence as a sector? So these seem to me to be the key questions as we move forward from a UK-wide perspective. You may disagree with them from a Welsh perspective, but I suspect they're going to be similar. I just want to mention one thing finally, which is very different and very grounded. We've been working this journal may or may not be familiar to you, but it's an international journal published by Intellect, the Journal of Arts and Communities. It goes into every university library, pretty much, internationally. And we've been working with them to develop a special edition, an ArtWorks special edition of this in 2014-15. We've got Call for Proposals, which is available online, but I do have a pile of copies of it, which I'll leave at the reception desk for people. And these are proposals that are not necessarily academic papers. They can be, but we're also looking for maybe visual representation of projects. We're looking for case studies. We're looking for examples of practice and work from a practitioner's perspective. So the special edition will be 2 separate volumes, 2 separate publications, one in April of 2015 and one in September of 2015. So I would urge you to take a look at the call for proposals and don't think of it as being about an academic thing. Think about the practice and what can be shared, because I think we've got a real opportunity here to profile the wonderful participatory work that takes place across the UK. Principal editor Stephanie Knight has put together a panel of guest reviewers, and those guest reviewers are drawn from the ArtWorks Pathfinders. So we're practitioners who are going to be reviewing the proposals, not all academics. And so I'd like to just launch that to you today as an opportunity and as something that I think could have some kind of long-term legacy in terms of the academic conversations and practice-based conversations. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much and have a great conference.